Hello and welcome to InfoFeed. In the heart of the Iraqi capital, there's a fortress. It covers 104 acres. It is nearly the size of the Vatican City. It cost the American taxpayer $750 million to build, and it is surrounded by blast walls, razor wire, and the most advanced air defense systems on the planet. It is the United States Embassy in Baghdad, the largest, most expensive diplomatic mission in the world. For 2 decades, it has stood as the ultimate symbol of American hegemony in the Middle East. It was supposed to be untouchable. But over the last 24 hours, the untouchable fortress has been under siege. A barrage of rockets and suicide drones rained down on the heavily fortified Green Zone. Sirens blared, diplomatic staff were rushed into underground bunkers. The night sky over Baghdad was lit up by American CRAM interceptors, frantically trying to shoot down the incoming swarm. Some were intercepted, and some were not. Washington is calling it an unprovoked escalation. They are pointing fingers at Iran-backed militias. But let us drop the diplomatic jargon and look at the reality. The attacks on the US Embassy in Baghdad are not random. They are the latest highly calculated move in Mojtaba Khamenei's era of vengeance. And they expose a terrifying reality for the Pentagon. That is, America's billion-dollar walls cannot stop $5,000 drones. To understand the panic in Washington today, you have to understand the target. The US Embassy in Baghdad is not just an office building where diplomats issue visas. It is a sprawling military diplomatic complex. It is the nerve center of America's presence in Iraq and Syria. When the US and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury against Iran a few weeks ago, they knew there would be retaliation, but they expected that retaliation to look like a conventional war. They prepared for ballistic missiles targeting major bases. What they did not prepare for was a swarm of kamikaze drones launched from just a few miles away, right inside the Iraqi capital. Look at the asymmetry of this attack. The militias operating in Iraq, groups like Kataib Hezbollah and the Popular Mobilization Forces, are using cheap, low-flying drones and unguided Katyusha rockets. They load them onto the back of a pickup truck, drive into a residential neighborhood in Baghdad, set a timer, and walk away. By the time the rockets launch, the fighters are gone. And what does the United States do? They fire their CRAM systems. These are essentially massive, radar-guided Gatling guns that shoot thousands of rounds a minute. They look spectacular on camera, but they are a desperate last line of defense. Even when the CRAM works, where does the shrapnel fall? It falls on the Iraqi civilians living around the Green Zone. This is the reality of the US presence in Iraq in 2026. The Americans are trapped inside their own fortress. They cannot leave the compound without heavy militia escorts. They are sitting ducks, and the militias know that they do not need to destroy the embassy to win. They just need to make it unlivable. They are applying psychological and physical pressure, day after day, night after night. It is a war of attrition, and historically, empires do not win wars of attrition against insurgencies. But there's a third player in this deadly game, and they are the ones paying the heaviest price. The Iraqis. Imagine being the Prime Minister of Iraq right now. Your country has spent the last 20 years being torn apart by American invasions, ISIS insurgencies, and proxy wars. You finally have a fragile semblance of stability. And then, Washington and Tehran decide to use your capital city as their personal boxing ring. The Iraqi government is caught in an impossible dilemma. On one hand, Washington is demanding the Baghdad reign and the militias. Secretary of State and Pentagon officials are issuing ultimatums. If you do not protect our embassy, we will strike the militias ourselves. But on the other hand, who are these militias? They are not a rogue band of rebels hiding in a cave. The Popular Mobilization Forces, PMFs, are officially recognized by the Iraqi state. They receive state salaries. They have political wings with massive representation in the Iraqi parliament. If the Iraqi Prime Minister orders the militia to crack down on the PMF, he risks starting a full-blown civil war. Furthermore, the Iraqi parliament passed a resolution years ago, demanding the expulsion of all foreign troops, including the United States. The American military presence in Iraq is deeply unpopular. Washington claims they are there to advise and assist, but the Iraqi streets see an occupying force that uses their airspace to bomb their neighbors. So, When Iranian proxies fire rockets at the US Embassy, they are not just attacking America. They are sending a message to the Iraqi government. You cannot protect the Americans, and the Americans cannot protect you. Tehran is effectively vetoing American diplomacy through firepower. They are showing that the region that the US cannot even secure its own backyard in Baghdad, let alone dictate the future of the Middle East. This brings us to the trap that Washington has walked right into. President Trump has built his political brand on strength. He cannot afford to look weak, especially after claiming that Operation Epic Fury has decimated Iran's capabilities. He is facing immense pressure from hawks in Washington to launch retaliatory strikes against the militias in Iraq. But if he strikes, then what happens? If the US bombs militia targets inside Baghdad or across Iraq, they violate Iraqi sovereignty. Again, the Iraqi government will be forced to condemn the United States. The Iraqi parliament will likely fast-track a binding legal mandate to forcibly evict the US military from the country. And if the US military is kicked out of Iraq, they lose their logistical land bridge to Syria. Their entire strategic footprint in the Levant collapses. This is exactly what Iran wants. Mojtaba Khamenei is playing chess, while Washington is playing whack-a-mole. Iran doesn't need to defeat the US military in a pitched battle. They just need to make the political and human cost of staying in Iraq so excruciatingly high that Washington packs its bags and leaves. It is the same strategy that forced the US out of Lebanon in the 1980s. It is the same strategy that forced them out of Afghanistan. By targeting the embassy, the militias are daring Washington to overreact. If the US does nothing, they look weak, and the attacks will continue. If the US strikes back, they alienate the Iraqi government and accelerate their own eviction from the region. It is a lose-lose scenario for the empire. So, what is the ultimate takeaway from the smoke rising over the green zone? It is a lesson in the limits of hard power. You can build the largest embassy in human history. You can surround it with a 10-foot concrete blast wall. You can spend billions on radar-guided guns. But if the people outside those walls do not want you there, your fortress will eventually become your prison. The siege of the US Embassy in Baghdad is a humiliation for a superpower that thought it could bomb the Middle East into submission. Operation Epic Fury was supposed to be a display of unrivaled American dominance. Instead, it has triggered a backlash that is tearing apart the foundations of American influence in the Arab world. Facts inform, but stories transform.